We'll get started here. Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session for the Modern Editors Toolkit. My name is Gabby O'Keefe. I direct all communications for NYPA. So any emails, socials you see, I am the one in charge of that. Um, just kind of some housekeeping before we dive into the session today. Did want to kind of give a quick reminder that our spring conference is happening this year, April 23rd to the 24th. So if you have not registered for that yet and you are looking to go, I would register as soon as possible because we are doing early bird rates right now. And as we approach closer to the date of the conference, prices will be going up. So make sure that you register online. I think Alec is going to drop that link in the chat. And then I will also be sending out an email later today for that as well. So be on the lookout for that. Um, Kind of some housekeeping that I wanted just to touch on before we dive right in. This session is going to be recorded, so we will be sending the recording afterwards via email. So if you miss anything, it'll be in the recording, so be on the lookout for that. And then we will have time for questions and answers at the end. But then again, if you're more than welcome to drop them in the chat, we'll try to get them answered as the session goes on. But if you can keep them for the end, that would be great. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Chris Coates, and he will kick it off for us.
Well, thank you, Gabby. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here, and thank you to the Press Association for having us. Happy New Year. It's really good to be here today. We'll talk a little bit more about our backgrounds, my background, and as well as Allison Petty's background in a moment, but I'm going to set the stage. I'm going to start by setting the stage. So if you're here, you're probably an editor, so welcome. And thank you, first of all, for the work that you do. This is really challenging times in the industry, of course. So much respect to all editors in the field, all journalists in the field as well. So thank you very much. Alice and I work with a lot of editors in our jobs. We're in a lot of newsrooms, a lot of conversations, a lot of presentations like this. And the editors we know all have an incredible amount of work and responsibilities on their plate. It used to be that editors were primarily moving copy, primarily managing people. Today, editors are managing overlapping systems, sometimes conflicting systems, platforms, people, trust, focus, workflow, all at once. That means the editor's toolkit has changed, even if the job title hasn't. Now, that shift has not happened overnight, of course. It happened quietly, and many editors were really never formally trained on any of this. I know I certainly wasn't. So we've had to adapt, we've had to evolve. And I think that says a lot about editors. We're adaptable, flexible, and resourceful as a group. This session is about the skills we've seen matter most in that new reality. So our goal is simple, that you leave today with maybe 3 or 4 phrases that you can use on Monday morning that will help you reduce the chaos. So here it is. This is the editor's reality in the year 2026. Happy New Year. If you're in this wonderful, challenging business, this probably feels familiar. Fewer people, faster cycles, higher visibility, less margin for error. That is the operating environment. That's what we signed up for. As I said, at the same time, journalism incredibly important, critical, really. We see that again and again in our communities, but this work is harder because of these 4 pressures. So do me a favor, thought exercise this morning. If you could, in your head, pick one of these bullet points that feels most true in your newsroom right now, the one that you're most dealing with, the biggest issue. And the good news with this is it's possible to make some headway. The challenge is that these issues overlap and reinforce each other. So today we're not going to solve everything. We're just here to kind of make a dent and hopefully make an impact and make your life a little easier. So in our experience working with editors and newsrooms of all sizes, there are some common qualities in successful operations, and it's these buckets. We're going to dig into each of these themes in a moment, but it's all about systems. So what does success look like in 2026? Well, to start, the most effective editors have fewer emergencies because systems are in place. Problems come up earlier and there's less scrambling. Priorities are clear, so there's focus. The team understands the mission. The pace is sustainable. Easier said than done, right? If everything always feels urgent, success is impossible. So the pace is sustainable. And there are fewer fire drills, more predictable decisions. Everything works in harness. And that's the ideal situation for success in an ideal world. That does not happen all the time, but that's why we're talking about this, right? Now over to Allison.
Yeah, so Chris, it feels heavy because the modern editor is facing all of this. As you said earlier, there's a lot on the plate, and this is just a sampling of the issues that you may be facing day to day as an editor. There may be more or maybe less given on day. This is just what we came up with for a typical editor. I'm not going to read this, but I just want you to sit with the weight of it. There's the basics like assigning and editing stories, coordinating coverage, coaching reporters, coordinating photo and video, managing projects, talking to community members and readers, and dealing with deadlines and HR and morale issues. Then editors oversee digital strategy and posting stories and hiring staff and monitoring analytics. And some of you may also be writing stories and editing video and even buying office supplies and very likely election day pizza. This is just a rough list, and I'm sure there's more. If you can think of something we missed, throw it in the chat. But as Chris said, this is why the job is so heavy. Editors are responsible for the basics of accuracy, fairness, and good judgment, but they're also managing platforms, people, audience trust, workflow, safety, and culture. Their IT, their HR. The job expanded quietly and in every direction. And if the list feels overwhelming, that's because it is. But despite everything editors do, we're ultimately accountable for just a few core things, just a few: accuracy and credibility, safety and ethics, editorial direction and priorities, public trust, staff sustainability. These aren't optional. These are what we're protecting, and they're why the job carries so much weight. Everything else is tactics, and these are the outcomes. We wanted to put this here and not at the beginning because this session isn't about credentials.
Yeah, and I would say that's right, Allison. We're really trying to learn from each other. These sessions are really important for us. We like to go out and we like to talk to people because a lot of newsrooms are doing really interesting things with staffing and journalism, and we learn an awful lot. So Allison and I have been very fortunate in our careers. We work with a lot of really talented people as news directors for Lee Enterprises. We have about 72 properties across the country, including in New York, from big newsrooms like Buffalo to small ones. And we also work together in our central Illinois markets. We managed multiple newsrooms, limited staff, so we certainly understand what it's like to juggle all of those issues that we saw on that sheet there. We are now together leading digital strategy for the company. I'm based in Richmond, south of Washington, D.C., and Allison is in Bloomington, Illinois. So we wanted today's session to be kind of a toolkit, informal toolkit about what the editor of 2026 needs. 2026 needs. We've both worked through a lot of challenges in our newsroom. Want to share what we've learned. So let's talk about the editor of today. Let's hop in the time machine, the DeLorean there, and set the scene. So one of the challenges we face as editors is that we're operating with systems that were established a long time ago, long before we became editors. And I think it's important because it helps us think about why being an editor can be so challenging. So here's a quick story. Allison and I both worked at our property in Decatur, Illinois, a few hours south of Chicago. Herald and Review, medium-sized paper. We both were editors. We did a lot of interesting work. They put together this really fun section. I loved it. When they moved buildings way back in September of 1976. I'll just read it. It says, after 81 years in the corner of North Street in Maine, we've changed our address to 601 East William, perched high at the intersection. Our handsome brick building houses 37,000 square feet of newspaper technology. 37,000 square feet. It was a great building. It did look like a fortress, but it was a really wonderful building. But here's the org chart. So there were a lot of people there. To be fair, this was a morning and an afternoon paper. Left side is just the newsroom, but you can see if it's 14 editors, just section editors, dozens of staffers. Now, of course, they needed that staff because pages need to be mocked up, photos need to be developed, the technology wasn't there. But at the same time, it was just one product. The system had more people, but also way fewer decisions per day for most news organizations compared to today. I say this not to be nostalgic. It's context. Editors today are still expected to succeed, but with often tools designed for a different system. So the old system was slower, fewer platforms, deadlines were more predictable, obviously vastly different resource levels. And before the internet, the footprint was much smaller, even for those places that fed content to the wire. By the way, this is a fun kind of shoots and ladders game showing the different parts of the newsroom. And the customer is called the winner there at the bottom. So this is the editor's world now, and it's faster, louder, more fragmented, and more public, more platforms, more deadlines, different resources. We have more tech, we have more AI, but mistakes travel instantly. Context doesn't, and nothing here is inherently bad, but it really changes what the job requires, and it raises the emotional stakes. So this is a lot, no question. And here to talk about some of the systems changing and the skills changing, Allison will take it.
Yes. So when systems change, skills have to change too. You can't do a new job with an old toolkit. Speed requires judgment under pressure. Fragmentation requires audience awareness. Scarcity requires prioritization. Automation requires literacy and guardrails. Complexity requires systems thinking. These aren't trends, they're survival skills. So, in the spirit of David Letterman and his top 10 lists, the top skills needed today and why. And we're going to dig into these more. To navigate this new ecosystem, the editor of today needs audience clarity. Who are you serving? A focus on priorities, an understanding of metrics and tech, coaching skills, how to think like a product developer, and how to develop a culture of feedback. The job did not get smaller, the system got louder, and the toolkit is how we stay in charge. So if you think about it, which of these skills is your biggest bottleneck right now? Audience, priorities, delegation, which was mine, coaching, metrics and AI, or feedback. This is where the toolkit comes in. We'll give you some tactics and different ways to think about these challenges. Everything else in this session is a deeper look at how to practice these skills without adding more work. These aren't standalone skills, they work together. We're going to walk through each one with concrete examples, starting with audience awareness. Audience awareness is an editorial skill, and it's critical in the year 2026. It helps us decide what to cover, how to frame it, and where to put our limited energy. A lot of editorial attention shows up when audience questions haven't been answered clearly. Stories feel unfocused, headlines get rewritten 5 times, editors and reporters disagree about emphasis. Good reporting doesn't land the way it should. Audience awareness gives editors a way to resolve those tensions earlier before deadline pressure takes over. Starts with 3 questions. Who are we actually reaching? Not who we wish we were reaching. The real, consistent audience that shows up and what they trust us to deliver. How do people encounter this work? Most readers aren't arriving through a perfect homepage journey. They're coming through search, social, newsletters, often midstream without context. And how does the platform shape understanding? A story read on a phone at 7 a.m. is a different experience than the same story read on a desktop at noon. This is about aligning our journalism with how people actually experience it, so our best work has the best chance to land and build trust over time. When editors are clear about audience, decisions get easier, editing gets faster, and fewer stories stall late. That clarity makes everything else in this toolkit possible.
Yeah, this screen capture is down there on the right there. I did use this sheet a number of years ago as a city editor, and the idea is to talk about this with reporters and have this be the basis for stories. So with every story, I asked, why does this matter? I mean, I think that's important. We should be doing things that have an impact, and we should be using our time effectively there. Am I advancing the story? So are we building something new into the story? Is this part of something bigger? So is this a trend? And then maybe most importantly, what can I leave out? So it's all about focus. It's about thinking about how people are consuming the story. It's about leveraging all of our journalism power to make sure the story is being advanced. So what this does, a sheet like this, and every editor kind of goes about newsroom management in different ways. But what this helps is we spend less time fixing structure at the end and more time shaping coverage at the beginning, which leads to toolkit number 2, which is coaching for impact. So I will be upfront. This is one of those skills that is easier said than done. I certainly struggle with this. I know it's really hard to find time to coach when you're juggling 500 inches of copy on deadline, but it's really important. Most editors are very good at fixing stories. That's why you're an editor. That's not the same as coaching. So fixing improves the story in front of you. Coaching improves the next 5 stories and reduces how much fixing you have to do later. So a lot of editors, in my experience, and me included, fall into rewriting because it feels faster in the moment. The story gets better, but the reporter might not. And the same problems keep coming back. So coaching is about helping journalists make better decisions before they hit publish and on their own. That starts earlier than we often think. So clear expectations at the assignment level, a quick mid-process check-in, and some follow-up after publication goes a long way. I always used to think if I fix this silently, I own it next time. So I always try to get back stories when I could. One thing to try, and this is a technique I used to use as an investigations editor, when you're working on very large stories or very complex stories, is if you're working on something for a long time, have the editor send or have the reporter send you the first 10 inches or so early in the process, so you can kind of see where the story's going. And that way you can kind of build some coaching, build some engagement there at the front end, rather than having the 800 story land on deadline and you're going to have to rework it. So ask for the first 10 early on, and that helps an awful lot with bottleneck. And then after a story runs, I mentioned this, but what would you do differently? That's a good question I used to always ask my reporters. How do you think this landed? What's been the response? That kind of like newsroom back and forth. Is there anything that you do differently? Anybody else we should have talked to? That kind of thing. All of this helps create a culture of coaching. Number 3, product thinking. So this sounds fancy, and this sounds very like, it just sounds like something that would happen in Silicon Valley or something. But really what we're talking about is something that editors used to do instinctively for many, many years, which is think about the reader first. It's front-end editing. Slowing down before publication, asking, who's this for? What do they need first? Where will they encounter it? And the second piece is thinking about packaging. So problems come up when the headline doesn't match the nut graph, the story without context. Product thinking helps catch those issues earlier when they're easier to fix. So what does this look like? So when we start planning a larger piece, I used to ask reporters to fill out this form. Now, I'm not a huge fan of forms, but I am a huge fan of conversations about stories. So this was the list. Seems a little daunting, right? But if you're doing a project, a larger story, ask these questions. What's the headline? What's the nut graph? What's the audience? What are the components? How does this have an impact on people? Who are the real people? I call real people anybody who's not a non-official source, right? So the people who are affected by the story we're writing about. Who are the other sources? Art and video? Are there data elements? Give me a timetable. Can we do some reader engagement, right? Like, can we do a live stream? Is there anything in that space? And then do you have anything else to share? And then the folks would put together, essentially it was a pitch memo. They would put together these key elements and respond to these questions. So this is the pitch memo on the right about a story looking at a series looking at housing costs in the Richmond area. And it really helped with refining the story by talking about it up front. So first, this does a few things. It's a master document for logistics and photos and graphics and deadlines and all that stuff. It also makes sure the reporter and the editor are on the same page from the very beginning. Now, it might change, it might evolve, it might go through a different area, but it really avoids mission creep if you can. And it forces us to ask those very important reader engagement questions early on. This is another thing we used to do in Central Illinois. It's called Pitchapalooza, and I was a strong advocate for this. Allison?
Yes. So another technique that we found helpful is how we pitch stories. Many newsrooms meet periodically to talk about larger stories or enterprise ideas. And if that's something that you do, here's a simple shift to try. Instead of asking for a full pitch, ask everyone to come into the room with 5 ideas related to their beat, and then ask them to pitch only the headline, or you could do only the lead, just one sentence. The goal is to distill the entire story, the point, the audience, and the impact into a single line. That constraint is intentional. If a reporter can't explain why a story matters in one clear sentence, it's usually a sign that the idea isn't fully formed yet, or that it needs sharpening before anyone invests time in it. This does a few important things. It forces clarity early. Reporters have to decide what the story is really about before they start reporting. That prevents stories from drifting or expanding without purpose. Second, it makes audience and impact visible. A headline immediately raises questions. Who is this for? Why should someone care? What's actually new or important here? It helps editors see patterns. When you hear a room full of headlines back to back to back, you can spot overlap, gaps, and opportunities for collaboration much faster than you can in a traditional pitch meeting. And finally, it saves time. You spend less energy debating half-formed ideas and more energy developing the ones that already have a clear point. It's about using the headline as a thinking tool. Once the idea is clear, the reporting gets sharper, the editing gets easier, and the final story has a much better chance of landing with readers. In busy newsrooms, especially small ones, that kind of upfront clarity is a force multiplier. And as Chris said, that was Pitchapalooza. It was
Those
very helpful and a new experience for me as a younger journalist in my career.
Look at those reporters in that photo, thrilled to be there. We give them Mountain Dew and cookies and tell them to pitch some ideas. So,
Yes. Do you like my stunning photojournalism?
yes.
Yeah. So picking priorities is number 4. This is easily one of the most challenging skills in the toolkit. I certainly struggled with it. A lot of editors hear prioritization and think time management, and that's not quite what this is. Prioritization is a leadership skill. It's how editors protect quality, safety, and people in newsrooms. There is never enough time. There are never enough people, and there is never a quiet day. So the risk is that without priorities, editors react instead of decide. The loudest thing wins, good work gets rushed, risk goes up. Prioritization is how editors interrupt that cycle. It's how you decide explicitly what deserves attention right now. Here's a simple tool that makes this visible. Ask yourself and your team this question. If you can only do 3 things well today, what are they? What are the most important topics driving the conversation in our community? So I'll give you an example of how this worked in practice. In Decatur, every December, we asked reporters to tell us 2 topics on their beat that they plan to focus on in the coming year. Not 10 ideas, not a wish list, 2. You can see some examples here. A government reporter is naming growing pension costs and new school construction. The sports reporter named recruiting and stories about real people, not just scores. This exercise did a few things. It forced the reporters to think ahead instead of reacting. It helped editors to see overlap and gaps early, and it gave reporters permission to say no to distractions that didn't align with those priorities. It created focus before the year even started. And we took those priorities and made them public. We published them. We said, here are the topics we're committing to covering this year. And we asked the community for help. What are we missing? What should we be paying attention to? Where should we dig deeper? This mattered. It made our priorities transparent. It made our work visible. And it reinforced that journalism is a conversation. This is how prioritization connects directly to trust. When communities know what you're focused on and why, they're more likely to engage and contribute.
Yeah, in that same space, I've done this in a lot of my newsrooms over the years. So every year, I have a staff meeting and review the past year with the staff. So you might do like monthly analytics meetings or monthly, huddles or whatever. This is a year-end meeting. It's a pretty I wouldn't say thorough, but a pretty produced look at the past year. I would go through all of our archives and look at the best photos, and it kind of got me thinking about awards, because I know when award season would come along, it was always like a huge task. I like to kind of button everything up before the end of the year. So anyway, put together a slideshow just like this, talk about where we're seeing growth, where we need to focus. And in this case, this was way back. I can't believe this was in 2019. It seems like just a moment ago. But our mission back then, driving aggressive digital growth, increasing digital subscriptions, sense of play stories. And we put some notable packages over there, which we were proud of. But the big thing is it does help you set the priorities for the next year. So this is for 2020. You can see the list. It's about audience expansion, growth areas. We posted these in the newsroom. This was our priority. There was no doubt about it. When priorities are explicit, and decisions get a lot easier. And editors spend less time negotiating urgency, right? It's there. This is what we agreed to. This is what we talked about. Doesn't eliminate pressure at all. It just gives us some shape when we start talking about what we're working on in the next year. Toolkit number 5, delegation. Another tricky one. I feel a little bit, it's hard for me to talk about this because I struggle with delegation. I know my friend Allison Petty does too. In small newsrooms, delegate more sounds unrealistic because sometimes there isn't anyone else. So delegation is not about offloading work. It's about clarifying who decides, not just who does. So in a lot of newsrooms, editors kind of end up as the default decision makers for everything. Not necessarily because they want to be, but because the ownership isn't clear. So, as we talked about on that huge list before, there's a lot of like HR adjacent things and a lot of not core journalism things that fall into the editor's lap. Editors step in because you're, first of all, good at decision making, and it feels helpful in the moment, but over time it creates this bottleneck. So even small shifts in ownership can make a huge difference. It's something worth making a priority in the year 2026 for yourself. Again, much like coaching, 5 minutes of clarity at the start saves a lot of headache later in the process. So what is, this is all great for me to say on a presentation on a Thursday, but what does this actually look like? So like reporters should own their headline and own the SEO fields and own these various parts of their package 2 weeks after they get coaching. It's not like Chris decides everything. It's whoever's closing tonight owns the homepage, owns these things, owns these different pieces of the components that our products are composed of. So rotate who monitors comments, community tips for 30 minutes a day, create systems to share some of these administrative tasks. It really does go a long way. It's something that I focused on when I was a top editor as well. And you have permission to do that. The goal isn't to do less as an editor, it's to stop being the single point of decision making so the newsroom doesn't slow down every single time you're pulled somewhere else. I think that's yours, Allison.
Yes. So 2 big topics and 2 areas where editors often feel pressure to either become experts or opt out entirely. Editors don't need to be technical experts, but we do need enough literacy to stay in charge of decisions because metrics and AI are already influencing newsroom choices, whether we engage with them or not. So here are a few practical ways that editors can address this without adding work. First, decide what metrics actually matter. Not every number deserves equal attention. Editors should be explicit about what signals audience trust or loyalty, what reflects real engagement, and what metrics are interesting versus actionable. When editors name what matters, dashboards become tools and not drivers. Second, use metrics to ask questions. Instead of why didn't this perform, try what does this tell us about how people encountered this story? That shift keeps metrics in service of learning and editorial judgment. Third, be explicit about where AI can help and where it can't. News organizations are all finding their own way with AI, and there are different approaches, and I'm not here to tell you what yours should be, but in terms of capabilities, AI can assist with summaries, tagging, transcription, or workflow support. It should not replace editorial judgment, sourcing decisions, or ethical calls. Editors don't need to understand how the tool works, but what decisions it's allowed to influence. And finally, stay curious, not reactive. You don't have to adopt every tool, but opting out entirely isn't neutral. Literacy is how editors protect values by understanding enough to ask better questions and make intentional choices. Number 7, feedback culture. In busy newsrooms, feedback often becomes reactive. We speak up only when something goes wrong. A healthy feedback culture isn't about more conversations, it's about clear ones.
Yeah, and again, this fits into our earlier theme, but your staff deserves feedback. It's how things run smoother and more effectively. I valued feedback when I was a reporter. Um, it's also easier said than done. I think maybe that should be the theme of today's or the title of today's presentation. But feedback, clear expectations, consistent follow through, specific feedback should be the goals. And importantly, what to stop doing. Don't save feedback for a review at the end of the year or let issues slide. Again, be very specific. Again, this is really tough work. Holding people accountable is really tough work. We're moving so fast. There's so many competing interests, but it's really something that editors should be doing, and it's a skill to work on. And this is what it comes down to. All 7 of the toolkit items. When everything is urgent, our focus goes away. As we said, being an editor in 2026 is incredibly challenging. But here's what it comes down to. Here are the core skills. Protect priorities, figure out what's important and run at it, coach in moments, figure out how to delegate ownership. Again, really, really tricky, but very, very important. And here's what we want you to leave with after this presentation. Editors are the stewards of 3 things at the end of the day. It's credibility, it's capacity, and it's community. Credibility, totally obvious. Accuracy, ethics, and trust. Capacity is the part we don't talk about enough. Sustainable pace, shared judgment. Community is not a buzzword. It's whether people feel heard, whether they understand your choices, and whether they stay connected when they disagree.
And the important thing is those 3 are connected. If capacity collapses, credibility slips. Credibility slips, community leaves. And when community leaves, the work gets harder to sustain.
So here's the practical Monday morning ask. So pick one tool from today, just one, and put it in your next meeting. The 3-minute audience check, the 3 things we did well today, priorities thing, the expectation, observation, impact, feedback line. You don't control every platform. You don't control every metric. You don't control how fast the world moves, but you do control how decisions are made in your newsroom. And when editors make decisions with clarity, the whole system gets a lot easier. So the job didn't get smaller, but it can get clearer. So thank you very much for joining us today. That is the presentation. We said we would save some time for questions. I know we covered a lot, and we know, obviously every newsroom is different. If you have questions or want to talk through how something we talked about would work in your newsroom, Allison and I are very happy to talk to you offline. Here's our contact information and our LinkedIn if you want to go that route. And we look forward to talking to you. Happy New Year, everyone, and we'll take some questions.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can either raise your hand or drop them in the chat, and we will delegate them accordingly. All right, I don't think that we have any questions at this time. If you do end up having any questions that come up, or if you want to, again, speak with Chris and Allison, feel free to reach out to them. They put their LinkedIns on the slide previous. I don't know if you guys want to drop the LinkedIn in the chat as well, so
Sure.
people can take. And we will be sharing this presentation afterwards. I know we had a question about that, so we will be sharing a copy of it just so you guys have it as well. Well, thank you, Chris and Allison, for your time today. Oh, okay, we did get a question. Sorry. Let's see here. Okay. All right, someone asked any resources you could recommend for story ideas that typically get engagement.
Oh, that's a perfect question. So, it depends. So every newsroom's different. It depends on what your analytics are showing. If you have access to analytics, I would follow the analytics. In our newsrooms, we tend to see some very, very similar trends across all of our markets, regardless of size. We know that, public safety is huge, obviously, but food and drink is something that people really care an awful lot about. It's a passion topic, and then growth and development, so new businesses and new construction, that sort of thing. But your analytics, that's your best asset, for sure. Allison, any other thoughts on that space?
So something I found really helpful and also quite interesting is joining the Facebook groups of all the communities that we cover, particularly like smaller towns. Those tend to be very active discussion spaces, and you can get a feel for, generally speaking, are people talking about what is the new business? Or are they talking about local government? Like you'll get a feel for what topical areas, in addition to specific story ideas out of there. So or next door, those types of things where, to borrow from the Little Mermaid, you're going where the people are and listening to what they're talking about.
Yeah, and I would say also you can just put a form on your website as well. We use a lot of Google Forms, even though our company is going away from Google Docs, like a lot of other companies. But the form is like, what would you like covered? What are the issues that are important to you? That kind of thing. We've stumbled onto a bunch of trend stories by asking, for example, here in Richmond, we're relatively close to Washington, D.C., and so obviously a lot of the federal workers are having their lives upended by reductions in staffing. And so just by asking for those types of stories, we got a huge response. That type of engagement, using social as well as the website, goes a long way for sure. Good question.
Great. All right. We have another question here in the chat. Someone asked, are the audiences for print and web different? Can that be summed up? I think they're different and try to keep that in mind, but don't know how to quantify that for our publisher.
Yeah, it's difficult because I would say this falls squarely in the category of business decisions, right? So like if your ownership structure values print more than the digital side, that's going to influence how you approach different things. We are a digital first organization, so we think about digital up front. Print is incredibly important. It's a huge part of our revenue matrix, but we want to grow our digital audience. So I'm going to answer by saying it depends, and it's a balancing act. I also think, and I'm going to give like a bunch of conflicting answers. I also think good journalism is good journalism, right? So regardless of audience, regardless of platform, if a story resonates, it could be a radio thing or whatever. It could be a podcast. The quality of the idea is what really counts. That makes sense. Allison, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, sort of. I think a print reader or someone who would have been a print reader becomes a newsletter reader often, or like an e-edition reader, because what they want is like the curated experience, right? So there's a way to provide that online that is addressing that type of person. I think that type of person is a different reader than someone who's coming in, through Twitter or Facebook or some other social platform.
As usual, Allison had a much better answer. That was
no.
hence we do these together.
Yeah, okay. So we also have another question. Someone asked, as a story develops, when do you just update it online and when do you post a new one? We go back and forth on this, and I always want updates noted as is that still the standard?
Alice, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think it depends too, and I think this is one of those where there's a lot of gray area in between, and I would find it hard to be prescriptive. I do think if you post too many incremental updates in different files, maybe that might start to burn your readers out and dilute the analytic on the story, so it makes it difficult to see how many people were following this. But at the same time, there is a point at which you need to break out into another one, or break out into a sidebar, or break out into a what to know. And Chris, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, so like I would say that the success that we've had over the years, and obviously every newsroom's different, every story's different, but rolling updates. So like, sometimes you'll see the New York Times like yesterday in Switzerland where it'll be like uh, Trump is speaking, and then there's the next update. So it's like kind of chronological order. So that when you promote that again on social, if you put it at the top of your site, if you effectively distribute that, you get a big response. And then typically you need someone to say, hey, there's a trend there that deserves its own, that there's something in there that deserves its own story, and then break that off and then refer back to the rolling updates. So the way I always think about breaking news, it's very much like production where you're trying to pull these different levers and get them in front of the audience in a certain way. But the answer to your question, rolling updates for us is certainly the best way to go.
And Chris, that's how you handled like the Richmond water system collapse, right? Rolling updates and the rolling update file linked off to the kind of broken out updates.
Right. And it essentially your rolling updates turn into, like, back in the day, we called them link farms, where it was like a mini landing page where you would direct people to, hey, here's a photo gallery, here's a video, that sort of thing. The key though is to always update that headline, make sure it's clear that this is the place that we're going to be updating, and then re-promoting on social, because remember, a lot of times your CMS will automatically post the first version. If you update it, you'll have to kind of manually go in and kind of update the social feeds. So it's really important to keep those feeds on social as well.
Great.
That's a
Awesome.
good question.
I think someone is typing a question right now as we speak. Give it a second.
Chris, I think these are some of the nicest questions you and I have gotten lately.
I was just
Okay. I think that's it. I don't see any more questions in the chat. Yeah, so if you guys have any further questions, make sure to connect with Chris and Allison, and they'll be able to help you out as best as they can. Thank you so much, Chris and Allison. We're really happy and excited that you were able to meet with us today and do this webinar for our member editors. And again, if you haven't registered yet for Sprint Conference, make sure to do that sooner rather than later.
I put our contact information in the chat. If you have any questions, please reach out. Thanks for joining us. Good luck with the snow. You guys are in for a
Oh my God, yes.
All right, look out for squalls. Sorry.
Yes, yes. Thank you guys so
you.
much. Have a great week.